This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is Randall Silvia. He was born June 4th, 1963, served in the Gulf War, Afghanistan, and various locations in the Middle East. He achieved the rank of Master Sergeant. We are recording this on November 1st, 2015. I'm Kyle Bunton, and I'm conducting this interview. So Randy, can you just tell me about your early life? Where did you go to school and where you grew up?
I grew up in Winsboro, South Carolina. I've spent my whole life here, other than just traveling with military service. I attended all the schools in Winsboro, elementary school, junior high, high school. I graduated from Winsboro High School, and then attended Midlands Technical College for a year, and didn't join the military until a little bit later, and I was 23 years old when I joined. So,
what made you want to choose the Air Force?
It was, well, my father was in the Air National Guard, so I really wouldn't have known anything about the base that I work at, pretty much, if it weren't for him. So he was there. He was in the active duty Air Force, and then he was in the Army Guard for a little while, and then he was at McIntyre where I worked for 22 years.
So your dad was a huge influence on you?
He was, yes. That was probably the biggest influence on me joining the military, was him.
All right. I guess can we go into basic training? How was basic training?
It was probably the Air Force basic training is not really known as being difficult physical-wise, probably compared to the Army. Basic training was hard mentally more than physically for me. It was probably very difficult being away from home. That was probably the first time in my life I'd ever been away from home. Even though I was already married when I joined the military, it was still difficult for me. I was very homesick when I got there, and but they kept you so busy just doing, from sun up to sundown. You were constantly doing stuff, and 6 weeks went by rather quickly. And then you had about 50 other people in our flight, so you made some really close friends, and kind of got over the homesickness pretty quickly, and got into the routine of doing all the military stuff, and it went by rather quickly.
Did you know what job you wanted to do?
Yeah, I was actually, whenever I went in, I had already selected my job before I got out of basic training, so and that was in aircraft maintenance.
Okay. So where was basic training?
It was in San Antonio, Texas, at Lackland Air Force
San
Base.
Antonio?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I guess we'll get into the first part of your, the first deployment. Let's talk about that.
Okay. First deployment came, other than just normal temporary duties, which we call TDY in the Air Force. I went several times to like Savannah, Georgia. I even got to go to Norway in 1988. So, but the first major deployment in like real world was in 1990-91, late 1990 for Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Okay.
So I went to Saudi Arabia for that.
Okay.
And that was my first deployment.
And when was like the soonest deployment after 9/11?
After 9/11, our unit went in October of that year to Qatar. Okay. And I did not go on that one. I went to the one the year after that in 2003. But we went in 2002 for a 90-day deployment, and 2003. And 2002 we were actually bombing targets in Afghanistan, and that was in direct result of the 9/11 attacks. In 2003, we went back for the second Gulf War against Iraq, and that was when they took Saddam Hussein's regime down. So I did go on that deployment. Okay.
And this is what I want to focus on most. Your like duties, like what do you do in your job, and like, what are your responsibilities?
Back then or now? Because I'm in the same career field, but it's changed over the years. Become more of a leadership type thing.
I guess we can talk about like what you did on your first deployment compared to like.
Okay. Well, on the first deployment and probably like the second and the third, I was my job is crew chief on an F-16, which and it's aircraft mechanic, and we're responsible for all of the inspections on the aircraft, any maintenance that has to be performed on the aircraft, any servicing, and launching and recovering the aircraft.
Okay. How many planes do you have like in the?
In our squadron, we have 28 airplanes.
Okay.
At the time of the Gulf War, we only had 18. We have since acquired 10 more.
Okay.
So,
All right. Let's see. So when was your last deployment?
the most recent one was a year and a half ago,
Right.
and we went to Jordan.
Jordan?
Yes.
Okay.
We were
so
there
you've been
for
pretty much
2.5 months. Yeah.
pretty much everywhere in the Middle East.
I've been to I think I've been to the Middle East like 5 times.
Oh wow.
So
What was your, I guess, favorite country in the Middle East? Or one you enjoyed the most compared to the others?
probably when we went to Qatar, it was
Qatar.
probably the nicest base.
Okay.
And normally, typically when a Air Force unit deploys, they don't go right in the middle of the action, so to speak. We were several hundred miles away, so it's not like we were in a combat environment, the whole time. And it was actually a pretty nice base. It's a very, very large base with a lot of people on it. And probably the least favorite base I'd ever been to over there was Afghanistan, because
Yeah.
we were kind of right in the middle of the action there. We were at Kandahar, which is probably one of the worst areas in Afghanistan, and we were there. Fortunately, we didn't have any casualties or
Yeah.
anything, but we did have the occasional rocket attack where they were shooting rockets at us from off base.
Yeah.
But fortunately, it wasn't very often. So.
So, I guess I want to go back to training and talk about like how do you bring someone into your team? Because you work with a team, right?
Right.
Per airplane.
Right. Well, we have normally you have like 2 people assigned to the airplane. You have a crew chief who is assigned to a particular aircraft, and they normally work their aircraft as much as possible. We have to move people around occasionally, depending on if certain people aren't there or whatever. But normally, when you deploy, you're assigned. If your aircraft goes, you're assigned to that aircraft, and then you have like an assistant. So you have 2 people per
Okay.
aircraft.
So when you're on deployment, do you run the planes like 24/7, or are they always
Yes,
on call?
normally you have 24-hour operations like in Afghanistan, and I don't think we did it in Jordan, but in Qatar, the Gulf Wars, of course, you fly 24 hours a day pretty much. So normally you have 2 12-hour shifts. So you have a group of people working in the daytime and a group of people working in the nighttime.
Okay. So the F-16, I want to talk about that a little bit. Is it used? What is it used for? Like close air support? Or?
Our primary mission is SEAD, which is suppression of enemy air defenses. So we fly with the HARM missile. The HARM missile is a high-speed anti-radiation missile. It takes out the surface-to-air missile radar sites,
Yeah.
which control where the surface-to-air missile goes. So that's our primary mission. However, we fly close air support. The F-16 is capable of air-to-air. It's a multi-role fighter, but our number one mission is SEAD, which is suppression of enemy air defenses.
Okay, right. So on the Afghanistan deployment, you weren't really doing air to air, were you?
No, it was air to ground.
Air to ground.
But when they do air to ground missions, they do have weapons on the aircraft which are capable of shooting down an aircraft
Right.
if they had to.
Okay. Let's see. What do y'all do when you were on leave?
When we're on leave
Yeah.
on deployments.
Yeah, on deployment.
You normally don't get much time off on
Really?
deployments. Yeah.
Just constant.
And normally the places that we've been to on deployments, you don't really get to leave the base or anything, so there's not like a whole lot to do on your day off. And it's almost like you would rather work to make the time go by
Yeah.
faster. Yeah. But you would, what we started doing, I think, and it varies from deployment to deployment, you would get maybe 1 day off a week just to, just kind of relax and, get some rest. And every deployment I've ever been on, we weren't able to leave the base except for probably last year when we were in Jordan, and that really wasn't your typical deployment where we were
Yeah.
there, dropping bombs or anything. And we got to go off base and see some really cool sites, some of the historical
Nice.
sites around Jordan.
There's another question I was going to ask you. Oh, so when you're on a deployment, other than being away from home, what is the hardest part? The heat or the food? What is it?
Well, that also varies from place to place too. Sometimes the food is less desirable than what you want. Sometimes the food has been very good.
Yeah.
So, you know, some of the places I've been, the food is really, really good, surprisingly, in that location. But what was the question?
It was like, what is the hardest part?
Other
Adjusting?
other than being away from home,
Mhm.
you know, just dealing with the environment, especially anywhere you go in the Middle East, you normally have a very harsh environment with
Yeah.
sand. You know, you have sandstorms. Sandstorms is probably the worst. You know, the heat. Fortunately, I haven't been over there that much when in the middle of the summer when the heat was,
Okay.
you know, when it was like 120 degrees every day. But I have been to some really, really hot locations. So probably just the living conditions, you know,
I can imagine
were
that.
the hardest things. But it really hasn't been. I mean, everywhere we've been, it's been adequate. I mean, it's not as bad. We don't have it as bad as the Army and the Marines do. You know,
Mhm.
we don't sleep out there in the field and everything. So
Yeah. Do you bring anything from home that's like for good luck?
yeah,
You just-
sure. Well, I mean, you know, you bring like, you know, pictures of your
Mhm.
family and your kids and everything, and you try to make your space, you know, as much like home as possible.
Mhm.
You know, sometimes it might make it a little bit harder, more difficult being away from home, you know. But you know, that's
Yeah.
kind of what gets you through the whole thing.
So you're Air National Guard,
Right.
and you plan on continue doing that?
Yes. Yeah, I've been in the Air National Guard for almost 30 years. This January will be 30 years, and I've got about. Of course, in the Guard, you can retire after 20 years,
Mhm.
but to retire full-time, I was a traditional guardsman for 15 years before I went full-time. So after I went full-time, you know, you have to have 20 years of active duty to
Mhm.
retire. So I've got about 15 now, 15 and a half. So I got about 4.5 years left until I retire.
How is the relationship between like y'all's officers and the enlisted guys?
It's really good, I think. I mean, you know, you always have, the officers are there for leadership, you
Mhm.
know, and then so are some of the enlisted people, but I think we have a very good relationship, and the job that I'm in, we work very closely with the pilots, and all the pilots
Yeah.
are officers, so, you know, we have a really good relationship with them, and we have a mixture of Guard and active duty pilots and maintenance people.
Mhm.
So we have we've had our active duty people with us for about 8 years now. And it used to be where we had mostly local people working at our base.
Mhm.
But now we have a very diverse group of people because we have people from all over the place, all over the country that we work with.
Okay.
And but as far as, you know, back to your original question, the officers, we have a very good working
Okay.
relationship with them.
Do most people work in the Air National Guard? Is it full-time job?
Well,
Or people work
like,
other jobs?
You have both. You have
Okay.
you have your traditional force, which is the 1 weekend a month, and the
Mhm.
2 weeks a year thing, which sometimes turns out to be a lot more than 2 weeks, especially if you have a deployment. But then you have a full-time force, which is what I'm part of, and it's probably I think we have about 300, maybe 350 full-time people at our base, and then on drill weekends, when we have the traditional guardsmen, we have about 1,200 there total. So
That's McIntyre?
right. So probably the full-time force makes up about 25% of our total force.
Y'all ever have to like train or like go travel to train before you deploy?
We do that. We do that quite a lot. Yeah, we travel. This year we've probably had maybe 5 or 6 trips, and you travel to different locations, mostly in the United States. Sometimes we do go overseas, but we go to places like Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. We're going out there pretty soon. We go down to Florida a good bit. We go to Key West. We go to over on the Panhandle and Gulf Coast. There's a couple of bases there that we go to, and every one of those bases that we go to, when you go to places like that, it trains you to deploy,
Mhm.
because you're packing up all your equipment, all your people, you have to process them to deploy, and you're moving your whole operation to another base, and that prepares you for when a real deployment comes along.
Mhm.
So you've done it so many times.
Yeah.
It's like and it makes it very easy.
Do y'all ever train with like the Army, the Marines?
Yes.
You do?
We train with, just recently we had a trip out west where we trained with the Navy. We were out in northern Nevada at Fallon Naval Air Station, where we trained with the Navy carrier group, and I think they were from the Ronald Reagan, and they were they're F-18s. When the aircraft carrier is at port, they take all the aircraft and fly them to a base inland, and we were there training with them for a couple of weeks. And you know, we train with the Army, probably like when we go out to Las Vegas. They have bombing ranges north of Las Vegas where you can practice your bombing, and you know the Army is there doing their thing, and they call in airstrikes and stuff like that. And I'm sure we probably train with other Air Force units more so than the other services, but we also fly against Marines that are located down in Beaufort.
You fly against them to
We
train?
fly, yeah, for training purposes.
That's awesome.
Yep, they fly against them. They fly against other units like out of Jacksonville, Florida, and up in North Carolina. There's some Marine units up there that we fly against. So we train a lot with mostly other aircraft units that the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force have, but also with the Army occasionally.
Let's see. I guess we can go back to like basic training. Do you remember any of your like drill sergeants or anything?
I can see his face plain as day, because when I first got here, I stepped off the bus, and the first thing I did when I stepped off the bus, I set down my bag, and he walks up to me and starts screaming right in my face. And I'll never forget his face as long as I live. And I think everybody else that goes through basic training says the same thing. And I mean, I remember his name and everything. I remember what he looked like, and I can even hear his voice screaming at you. So yeah,
Wow.
I'll never forget it. I think everybody says the same thing too, that they never forget it. But he was a really sharp guy.
Have you made any really close friendships?
Oh yeah, I've had there's a lot of people that work with me that I've been working with for the 30 years, the whole 30 years that I've been there, and a lot of some of them have come and gone. Some of them join and only stay in for 6 years. Some of them stay in 10 years, and they come and go. So I've made a lot of friends over the years. We have, like I say, we have active duty people now, so they kind of come here and then they stay about 4 years and then they move on to other bases. So I've made some pretty good friends through that. But probably the best ones have been there a long time, just like I have. Been on many deployments together. And I guess you could say you've been to war together. So
Yeah, absolutely.
So
back to the job. Like, how complicated is it to like figure out how to fix an airplane? Like,
well, like with our job, we're responsible for the entire aircraft, and then we have shops that are responsible for the different systems. Like you have an engine shop, you have weapons, electro-environmental, which is responsible for the electrical part, and the environmental, the ECS, which is the environmental control, the cooling, heating, cooling, all that. Then you have avionics, who are responsible for like the the radar and the weapons delivery system and all that. So you have specialists that are responsible for those systems. So our job is basically the entire aircraft, and then when you have a problem with one of those systems, then normally the specialists come and work on their part of the aircraft. But when you go through your training, after basic training, you go to a tech school, which is several months long. You learn basically the entire aircraft and the basic fundamentals of it, and then as you go through your career, you learn the systems, more and more. So,
what's like a problem that you've seen over and over again, or like a common problem you've seen with the aircraft or with the, like, something that you've had to fix like more than once?
We have a lot of probably like fuel problems where we have external wing tanks, and we may have to like swap those tanks out if they have a problem with the tanks feeding into the aircraft. Avionics, you probably have a lot of problems with that because there's so many different components in the aircraft that are avionics. You know, the flight control system, the like I said, the weapons delivery system. You know, the radar, all of that. You know, very complicated equipment. So, you know, we have quite a few failures with that.
Is that different in like the Middle East, like sand and stuff? Is it just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
makes
it
a lot
can
worse?
affect it. Yeah. In fact, I remember when we went to Desert Storm, we had a lot of issues with some of the valves on the aircraft that have like air that comes off of the engine that does certain things. You know, those valves would be sticking because they would get sand in it, and you know, it took some time for them to get that situation straightened out, and they had to modify, I think, the parts. But you know, their airplanes are, you know, they fly in the Middle East a lot. Even though we're not over there a lot, there are aircraft there all the time. So so they do fly in that environment a lot. But yeah, it does affect it. So.
Okay. All right. Oh, okay. I know a question I want to ask you. What's the first thing you eat when you get back, usually?
From a deployment?
Yeah.
Usually like a big greasy cheeseburger or something like that. I remember when we came back from Desert Storm, I think the place we stopped at was Rush's, and burger joint, and I got like a big cheeseburger. Normally the food is pretty good, but you don't, it's definitely not the best. So it's normally sufficient, and when you get back, you kind of want, some of the things that you haven't had in about 2 or 3 months. Luckily for us, we don't have to eat the MREs like the Army and the Marines do. Yeah. We do occasionally, but not that often.
So going back to your first deployment, or one of your earlier deployments, is there anything there that you learned? I mean, obviously, but is there anything there that you wish you would have known going in, as far as like leaving and like adjusting to like life over there?
I think when we got there, we got to the first deployment was Desert Storm. I think the invasion happened when Iraq invaded Kuwait. It was in August, early August, and we didn't get there until late December. So we pretty much knew going in how it was going to be, because there had been people that had been there, especially the Army and the Marines, had been there for about 5 months before we even got there. So it wasn't like we got there not knowing exactly how it was going to be. That we had a pretty good idea of how it was going to be, and it was probably about like I expected it to be. And then every time you go on another deployment after that to that area, you kind of learn from the previous deployments, what to take, what not to take. I tend to have a bad habit of overpacking. I take way too much stuff, but I'd rather do that than take not enough stuff.
Yeah.
But it probably wasn't a huge surprise when we got there. We probably knew about what it was going to be like.
So when you have your planes flying the missions, are they always like striking targets? Are they just waiting for
Not normally,
requests?
yeah. They sometimes when they take off, and it varies a lot depending
Yeah.
on where you are, what you're doing, which deployment you're on. But sometimes they're just up there and they're waiting for a target to become available at that point. Like the
Mhm.
Army might call them in or whatever, or they may have a predetermined target where they know, as many as days in advance what they're going to hit. They might know where they're going to hit that far off. I think probably in Afghanistan it was more of a thing like they were flying around for like 6 to 8 hours and just waiting to be called
Mhm.
in to drop bombs. Probably in Desert Storm and in the second Gulf War, it was probably more of a situation where there was predetermined targets and they knew what they were going to hit when they took off.
Can you tell me like what a pilot's like what their favorite munition would be for like a close air support
I've
mission?
found with our pilots probably their favorite is the one that makes the biggest explosion.
Which one is that?
Well, like a 2,000-pound bomb probably would make a pretty big explosion. I would think like a
JDAM or?
yeah, JDAM. JDAM I think is about a 1,000-pound bomb. It's a very accurate bomb because it's I think it's GPS guided or whatever. So yeah, I've found with them is they like the ones that make the biggest explosions. Yeah.
Have you been able to talk to any of the guys that have been on the ground when your guys are helping them out, or have you heard any stories of?
Like from the Army or something like that?
Yeah, from the
or-
Army or the Marines that are on the
No,
ground.
not really. We don't really know even who they are. And we don't see any of that. And probably the pilots never even know who they're talking to. When they go out there and they're called in to drop bombs or whatever, and then they come back, they don't even know who they're talking with out there. It's probably for the most part, there may be rare cases where they run into somebody that they work with or something, but it's probably just a voice on the radio that they hear calling them in. But,
So you'd say like y'all being there, that's extremely important to the guys on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
As far
Oh,
as them being able to do their mission.
yeah, I think it's. I think if you ask, any of the Marines or the Army guys who call in airstrikes and stuff like that, it's probably saved a lot of lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being able to do that when they get in trouble or whatever. Unfortunately, you do have the occasional friendly fire accidents too, where they call them in and they put the bomb falls in the wrong place or whatever, and unfortunately, that's just a part of war.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, and you try to minimize it, but it does happen occasionally, unfortunately.
Mhm. What are your plans? Do you plan on staying? When do you plan on like retiring?
I hope to retire I'm eligible to retire in about 4.5 years.
Is that what you're planning on doing?
I would like to, yeah. It just depends, financially, you take a pretty big hit financially when you retire. So I don't know if I'm gonna maybe get a job in the civilian world when I retire. I don't want to, but if I have to, I will. And I got a daughter that just started college, so if I can get her through college relatively debt free, then I hope to retire as soon as I'm eligible. I'd like to. Or if I decide to stay a few more years, I may stay until I'm quite close to 60 or whatever.
So you have to drive to the.
I do. I drive like 46 miles one way.
Every day?
Every day, yep.
That's a drive.
Yeah, it is.
All right.
You do it for a long, long time, you get used to it. So.
Yeah. I think that's good. I think we're good. That was a good one.